We've conducted an A/B test before, therefore we don't need to do it ever again. That is absolutely not true, and I'm going to talk you through why that is. Hello and welcome to Engage and Thrive, also known as EAT, your coffee catch-up with me, your host Taelon, where we will go through common problems and hurdles that come up in business, marketing and advertising and try and demystify them. I know firsthand how complicated and confusing it can seem with all the different acronyms and all the things to do in business. So let me try and help you be better in business. First things first, let's start with grabbing a coffee. Okay, so to start with myth busting, why this is not true, the first thing to cover off is when people say they've done an A/B test, tell me, where have you done this A/B test? Because if you're going to tell me that you've done an A/B test on a couple of landing pages on your website, that's just like one component of it. There's so much more that can be tested, there's so many variables that can be done, and it's not one and done. So that's the first thing, just to myth bust. Next thing to go through is vocab, as always. So the first one is A/B test. What is an A/B test? And it literally does what it says on the tin. So it is, you have a option A and you have an option B, and you run it in different scenarios, whether it's a campaign, an email, a landing page or whatever, and you see which one performs better. And then the idea is that you keep running that. But you may then take that B and do CD of B. But we'll go into that further in a moment. Then the next one is CRO, so conversion rate optimization. Then we have KPI, key performance indicator. As always, we love covering that one off. Then we have your CTA, which is your call to action. Another one that you can do lots of A/B testing with is your CTA. Then you have your LTV, which is lifetime value, ROI, return on investment, UX, user experience. And that's it. I don't know why I stopped then, as though I had more to cover off. That is all. So today we're actually going to go through 3 key takeaways, and these are kind of just explaining to you how and why you can do different A/B testing and why it's important that it's not just one and done. So number 1, which is continuous. So as I mentioned in the opening about myth busting this is something that you should be doing ongoing all the time, and it should excite you. So for example, on Facebook, you can do A/B testing of captions and A/B testing of cover images for your reels. You should do that with every piece of content that you're doing. By the way, for reference, you can't actually run a caption test and a cover test on the same piece of content. So you would need to choose if you're running a caption test or a cover test. The other one you might hear people talking about quite regularly is thumbnails on YouTube. So running A/B tests for thumbnails on YouTube. Then there's your email, right? So when are you sending your emails? What time of day? What are your subject lines? What are your sign-offs? What is your call to action in your email? So I think just to like confirm about why I'm saying this one is continuous is when you think you've done enough testing or A/B testing, there's probably another thing you could test. So it is ongoing, it is continuous. But the reason why as well is that behaviours change. So I'm not saying spend your whole life doing A/B testing, right? Because we've all got stuff to do and we have to crack on and we have to kind of take an assumption of things working and then do something with it. But you need to understand that markets change, user behaviours change, trends change, and you need to keep up with that. So for example, if you ran an A/B test a few years ago about time of day that people were reading an email versus now where there's more remote working, that time of day might be completely irrelevant because user behaviors change and markets have changed. So the next one to go into is number 2, which is validation. So validation of your results and what you're doing, and I suppose the environments you're putting those A/B tests in. So things to think about is there are always external factors that will influence and impact what happens with your A/B tests. Then there's also like, how are you going to measure about features or images or whatever of how you're going to validate what worked. So to say on that, when you're saying about features and images, is if you're running too many tests, so if you're doing more than just an A/B test and at the same time you're doing an A, B, C, D, E test, and then you have 2 that come in, so you might want to narrow it down and be like, okay, then 2 features were really effective, now let's test those 2. but you need to think about how much testing you're doing and what the scope is, how many things you're testing, how do you then validate of what you're going to do with that information next, how long you're running those tests for, and therefore doing that iteration of getting that information and processing it as a business. So for example, if we were going to test landing pages, right, you may want to test landing pages for 2 weeks, or you may want to test landing pages for 6 weeks. When you're testing those landing pages, are you testing it in the environment of just organic traffic? So therefore, you may need a little bit longer. You may not even be thinking about 6 weeks. You may be thinking about more 3 months. Or you're going to test those landing pages on paid campaigns. Okay, 2 weeks might be a good way to see the optimization of it and which one to run with. But then of those paid campaigns, if you have it running from Facebook versus Google Ads versus Instagram, those are all varying factors and potentially also different demographics that you've got running. So just actually with the validation, so I've forgot to mention this in the beginning, which is really important, I suppose, in the myth busting, is to do these A/B tests. You need to really understand your customer profile and your target audience, because you need to understand what you're testing to get a better reach and I suppose hook in with your customers, right? That's the whole point of doing the A/B testing. You're not just running the A/B testing to be like, oh, hey, let's see what happened and this is a fun experiment. The experiment should be because you want better conversion, or you want more signups, or you want more followers, or whatever your metric is of why you're doing the testing, which kind of goes into number 3, the comprehensiveness, not a word, let's call it comprehensive, of what you're doing. So like I said, it can become so granular in terms of what you're doing for A/B tests. You can test headlines, you can test CTAs, you can test voiceovers, you can test user flows, you can test your images, you can test. And so when I'm saying user flows, for example, right, that might be someone, how they get to your website, or it could be as simple as how they engage with you. So if you're running a campaign and the kind of the CTA around it is going to a website versus sending a message versus making a phone call, those are obviously your CTAs, but also your user flows of what happens next. Then it could be for retargeting or following up on emails. I mentioned voiceovers too. So if you're doing a voiceover, are you using male or female, or a more gender neutral voiceover? What's the age of the voiceover that you're using? What's the language or the accent of the voiceover? If you're doing your headlines, how are you testing your headline? Are you testing it on color, on size, on positioning, on tone? Like, there are so many things that you can go into, which kind of is the whole thought around myth busting, that A/B testing should be ongoing. So there should be constantly things that you're trying to tweak and refine. I know a lot of the examples I'm using refers to websites, but honestly, this also refers to social media as well, how you do interactions. If you were doing events, it's a little bit more expensive to do A/B testing in the offline capacity because, it's the printing cost or the setup cost or whatever, whereas with digital, it's easier to track, it's easier to monitor, and then you can obviously use those results to keep refining. But if you're doing it, just to give you more examples, I suppose, in a social media context, think about time of day you're posting. Think about actual day of the week you're posting. Thinking about the cadence of platforms, for example. So there's a prime example to use is, if anyone listens to the podcast by Neil Patel, Digital Marketing School, he always talks about how they A/B test thumbnails for a podcast before he released the podcast, and he tests those thumbnails on Facebook so they can see what people are clicking on, and then they use that information as a thumbnail to put on their YouTube videos. So you can also use that as an example of a test. And yeah, okay, I feel like I've gone into lots of this. So moral of the story is A/B testing is ongoing, and keep trying, keep doing, and have fun with it. So thank you for joining me for another week of Engage and Thrive with your host, Taelon, and see you next Thursday.